If you have played games for long enough, you have probably heard the phrase free-to-play more times than you can count, and depending on who you ask, those three words usually come with a pretty bad reputation. Some people immediately think of pay-to-win mechanics. Others think about battle passes like daily login streaks, premium currencies, limited time events, or games that constantly remind you there's a shop waiting for your credit card. And to be fair, a lot of free-to-play games earn that reputation. After all, if the game doesn't charge you upfront, it has to make money somehow. So developers are always trying to answer the same question: how do we convince players to spend money? Most studios answer that question by making the game slightly more inconvenient until opening your wallet starts feeling like the easiest solution. Warframe went in a completely different direction. It still wants your money, let's not pretend otherwise. Digital Extremes isn't running a charity here. But instead of constantly asking players to pay before they've had a chance to enjoy the game, Warframe spends years giving people reason to want to support it. And I think that's a really important difference, because after more than 13 years, Warframe isn't just one of the longest running free-to-play games still around. It is also one of the few examples people consistently bring up when they talk about free-to-play done right. That doesn't mean it's perfect, far from it. Warframe has plenty of flaws, and if you have watched the previous videos in this series, you already know I have no problem pointing them out. The new player experience can be overwhelming. Some systems desperately need better explanations. Certain grinds can test your patience, but despite all of that, people keep coming back. So today I want to answer one simple question: why? One thing I've always found interesting is that people sometimes talk about free-to-play like it's automatically a positive, as if making a game free somehow guarantees people are going to play it. But if that were true, we'd all be playing the exact same games. Every year we see dozens, maybe even hundreds of free-to-play games launch. Some disappear within months, some don't even survive a year, some never manage to build a community in the first place. Being free gets people through the front door, it doesn't convince them to stay. Think about it for a second. Downloading a game takes around 20 minutes if you have a good connection. Sticking with that game for hundreds or even thousands of hours is a completely different commitment. Warframe has players with 5,000 hours, 10,000 hours. I've even seen people with numbers that honestly make me question whether they ever sleep. Nobody reaches those numbers because the download button said free. They get there because somewhere along the way the game gave them a reason to keep coming back. Maybe it was finally crafting the Warframe they've been grinding for all week. Maybe it was finishing a quest that completely changed how they looked at the story. Maybe it was finally understanding a system that seemed impossible a few days earlier. Or maybe they just logged in thinking they'd play for 30 minutes and somehow it turned into 3 hours. Again, that's something every successful live service game has to figure out. How do you make players want to return tomorrow? Some games answer that with fear of missing out. Limited time rewards, battle passes, daily objectives that make you feel guilty if you skip a day. Warframe has some of those elements too. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't. Night Whip exists, daily standing caps exist, sorties reset every day. The difference is that those systems rarely feel like the entire game revolves around them. If I decide to take a break from Warframe for a month, the game doesn't suddenly become unrecognizable when I come back. Sure, I'll probably have a lot of updates to catch up on. Maybe there's a new quest, a new Warframe, or another mechanic I'll have to learn. But I don't usually feel like the game is punishing me for taking that break. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons so many players eventually return. Warframe doesn't constantly pressure you into making it your only game. Ironically, that makes it much easier to keep coming back to, because logging in starts feeling like a choice, not an obligation. And I think that's a really important distinction. The game respects the fact that people have lives outside of it: work, university, other games. Sometimes you just don't feel like farming argon crystals for the 5th time this week. Warframe lets you walk away, and when you're ready, it usually waits right there where you left it. That's not something every live service game can say. Whenever someone hears that Warframe has a premium currency, the reaction is usually pretty predictable. Oh, so that's where the catch is. And I get it, most of us have played games where the premium currency is locked behind real money. You want a skin? Pay. You want to skip the grind? Pay. You want a shiny new thing? Pay. And that's just how we've come to expect free-to-play games to work. Warframe starts the same way. Its premium currency is called Platinum. You can buy it with real money, use it to purchase cosmetics, inventory slots, weapons, warframes, and a bunch of other things from the in-game market. So far, nothing unusual. Then the game introduces one small detail that completely changes everything. Players can trade Platinum with each other. That single decision completely changes how the economy works. Let's say I spent a week farming prime parts. I don't really need them, so I sell them to another player. Instead of getting gold, credit, or some useless token, I get Platinum. Real premium currency. The same Platinum someone else bought with real money. At that point, the Platinum stops belonging to digital extremes and it starts moving through the community. That's what makes Warframe's economy feel so different. Money enters the game when someone buys Platinum, but after that, it's constantly changing hands between players. The economy is alive. One player spends money because they don't have time to farm. Another player spends time farming because they'd rather not spend money. Both players get what they want. I've seen people buy almost every cosmetic they wanted without spending another dollar after their first purchase. I've also seen completely free-to-play players build up hundreds or even thousands of Platinum just by understanding the market. And that doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to finish Versus Price and suddenly become the Wolf of Wall Street. You want to learn what people actually want. Prime parts, rare mods, arcanes, ribbons if you're brave enough to enter that economy. There are entire websites that cater to tracking prices because the player market has become so active. At some point, you're just not playing Warframe anymore, you're participating in its economy. Because instead of separating paying players from free players, the game gives them a reason to interact. One group supplies Platinum, the other supplies items, both sides benefit. That creates a healthier relationship than simply locking every premium item behind a checkout screen. Now, that's not to say Platinum solves every problem. There are still things you probably want to spend it on, especially early in the game. Weapon slots and Warframe slots are the biggest examples. If you're constantly building new equipment, which the game encourages you to do, you're eventually going to run out of space. That's one of the most common criticisms Warframe receives, and I think it's a fair one. The good news is that even those slots can be bought with traded Platinum, so while the inconvenience is definitely there, the solution is still available to every player whether they've spent money or not. That doesn't magically make the criticism disappear, but it does make it feel less restrictive than in many other free-to-play games. And I think that's an important distinction. Warframe isn't saying you must pay, it's saying you can pay or you can learn the economy. That choice makes all the difference. Now, after everything I just said, I don't want to give the impression that Warframe is somehow this completely selfless game that doesn't care about making money. Because of course it does. Digital Extremes is a studio. Studios need to pay developers. They need to keep servers running. They need to fund feature updates. And none of that happens for free. Warframe absolutely wants you to spend money. The difference is how it tries to convince you. A lot of free-to-play games make money by creating problems and then selling you the solution. Maybe progression is painfully slow unless you buy XP boosts. Maybe the best equipment is locked behind paid content. Maybe you hit an artificial wall where the game basically says you can keep grinding for another 20 hours or you can pay $10 and skip all of that. Warframe rarely feels like it's built around that philosophy. Instead, the most of what it sells falls into three categories: time, convenience, and cosmetics. Let's start with time. Technically, you can farm almost every Warframe in the game. You can farm prime equipment, you can farm resources, you can farm mods, you can even farm the Platinum to buy those things from another player. Buying something from the market usually isn't unlocking content that was impossible to access before. It's skipping the process of getting there yourself. And honestly, I think that's a fair trade. If someone works full-time and only has a couple of hours to play each week, I completely understand why they'd rather buy a Warframe than spend those few hours repeating the same mission. On the other hand, if someone actually enjoys the grind, the game lets them do that too. They're just valuing different things. Then there's convenience. Things like extra loadout slots, inventory slots, organ reactors, organ catalysts, forma bundles, all of that. None of these are exciting purchases. Nobody wakes up thinking, you know what would make my day? Buying 5 more weapon slots. They're practical. They're there to make your experience smoother. I think the slot system is one of Warframe's weakest monetization decisions, especially for new players. Running out of space right when the game encourages you to build more weapons feels unnecessarily restricted. But then again, because platinum can be traded, that wall never feels permanent. You don't reach a point where the only answer is opening your wallet. You just need to decide whether you'd rather spend money or spend time earning the platinum through trading. Then we get to cosmetics. And this is where I think Warframe really shines, because cosmetics are exactly what they should be. Optional. Nobody needs a deluxe skin, nobody needs an ephemera, nobody needs a Signa, a Sayandana, an armor set, or a color palette. Do they make your Warframe look incredible? Yeah. Do they make you deal 50% more damage? Not unless the enemy dies from intimidation. Warframe understands something that a lot of live service games eventually figured out too. Players love customization. If you build a character over hundreds of hours, you're naturally going to want that character to look unique. You're attached to them. You're proud of what you built. And if someone decides to spend money because they want their favorite Warframe to look even cooler, that's a much healthier motivation than spending money because they felt forced into it. Of course, none of this means Warframe is perfect. Craft timers can still be frustrating. Some resource grinds definitely overstay their welcome. And there are moments where the game feels like it's testing your patience. But those moments usually come across as asking, would you like to speed this up? Not, you can continue unless you pay. That difference might seem small on paper. In practice, I think it's one of the biggest reasons players are willing to support the game instead of feeling resentful toward it. Because after enough time, buying platinum doesn't feel like paying a fee just to keep up playing. It feels more like supporting a game you've already decided was worth your time. One of the biggest reasons I think Warframe has survived for so long has nothing to do with platinum, trading, or monetization. It's the fact that digital extremes never really stopped building the game. A lot of live service games eventually settle into a routine. Maybe every few months they add a new character, a new weapon, a balanced patch, and there's nothing wrong with that. If people enjoy the formula, why change it? Warframe could have done the exact same thing. Release a new Warframe every few months, throw in a couple of weapons, maybe add another mission type every now and then, and players probably would have kept playing. Instead, Digital Extremes kept asking a much more dangerous question. What if we tried something completely different? Sometimes that worked incredibly well, sometimes maybe not as well, but I respect the fact that they're willing to try. Think about the game's history for a second. At first, Warframe was a fairly straightforward mission-based looter-shooter. Then they introduced cinematic quests, not just cutscenes, actual story-driven experiences that completely changed how people look at the game. The Second Dream, The War Within, The Sacrifice, The New War, each one felt bigger than the last. Then they added open worlds. Suddenly, instead of running through randomly generated hallways, players were fishing in the plains of Eidolon, mining resources in Orc valleys, or exploring the Cambion Drift. If you had told someone back in 2014 that Warframe would eventually let you catch fish with a spear, they probably would have laughed. Then came Railjack, an entire spaceship, not a menu nor a loading screen, an actual ship you can pilot with your friends. Then the Necromex, because apparently becoming a biomechanical space ninja wasn't enough. Now you could also pilot a giant mech. Dubiri completely changed the pace of the game again. Instead of focusing on speed, it encouraged players to slow down, explore, and approach combat differently. It almost felt like Digital Extremes wanted to prove they could make a different genre without leaving Warframe behind. And then Warframe 1999 happened. If you had shown me footage of 1999 10 years ago and told me it was a free-to-air Warframe update, I genuinely would have thought you were talking about a completely different game. And I also would have not probably understood it because I was like 10 or 9 years back then. Motorcycles, as it inspired in the late 90s, an invested boy band, romance options, new factions, completely different aesthetics, and somehow it still feels like Warframe. I think that's the most impressive part. None of these updates erased what came before. The game didn't suddenly stop being Warframe. Every time a new expansion released, instead it kept growing. Layer by layer, year after year, and now to be fair, not every experiment has been a massive success. Some systems took years to improve, some updates launched with rough edges. Some mechanics needed several reworks before players really embraced them. And that's just part of making a live service game that's constantly evolving. I'd honestly rather see developers take risks that don't always land than watch them play it safe for a decade. Because every once in a while, those risks become some of the game's defining features. Imagine Digital Extremes had decided Parkour 2.0 was too ambitious, or that cinematic quests weren't worth the effort, or that open worlds didn't fit Warframe's identity. The game would have survived, I'm sure it would have. And I think that's the biggest compliment I can give the developers. After 13 years, they still seem willing to surprise their own community. That's not just something you see very often. There's one joke you'll hear over and over again if you spend enough time around Warframe players. Fashion Frame is the true endgame. Funny part is that when you're new, you think everyone's exaggerating, because I did. You look at your starter Warframe with 2 colors unlocked and think, yeah sure, whatever. Then a few hundred hours go by, you've got stronger weapons, you've finished the big quests, you've started optimizing builds, you're clearing content you've never thought you'd even attempt. And then one day you open the arsenal because your chest armor is slightly clipping into your Zayandana. 30 minutes later, you're still there. You haven't played a single mission, you've changed your color palette 12 times, you've switched between 2 helmets about 15 times because you still can't decide which one looks better. You've removed your shoulder armor because maybe less is more, then you put it back on because no, less was definitely not more. Somehow you've spent half an hour doing something that has absolutely nothing to do with progression. Welcome to Fashion Frame. I think that's one of the biggest compliments I can give this game, because Fashion Frame only works if players actually care about their characters. Nobody spends 20 minutes matching colors in a game they don't enjoy. Nobody buys a deluxe skin for Warframe they hate. Nobody spends hours in captura mode trying to get the perfect screenshot if they aren't proud of what they've created. Customization becomes a way of showing your personality. You can hand 10 players the exact same Warframe, and somehow you'll end up with 10 completely different designs. Some people go for realistic color schemes, some try to recreate characters from other games, some make everything look like an ancient god. Others discover every possible combination of black, pink, neon green, and gold, and I'm not judging. I'm just saying I need sunglasses every time I load into a relay. And that's before we even talk about how many options the game gives you. You've got deluxe skins that completely reinvent how Warframe looks, Tenogen, where community artists actually get their work added into the game, Sayandanas, armor sets, sickness, ephemeras, color palettes, animation sets, weapon skins, companion cosmetics, operator and drifter customization, orbiter decorations, dormy zones, clan dodges, and at some point it stops feeling like your customized character. It feels like you're building your own little corner of the origin system. I love that Warframe doesn't stop at your character. Your orbiter slowly becomes your home. You decorate it with Ayatan sculptors, fluffs, nuggles, lands, fish tanks, posters, art. You can spend hours rearranging things that have absolutely zero impact on gameplay. The Dormy Zone takes that idea even further. Then there are clan dodges. I've seen dodges that genuinely looked like they belong in another game. Entire cities, space stations, temples, labyrinth. I've even started my own clan with my friend just so we could customize things as we wanted. People have spent thousands of hours building those places simply because they wanted to, not because there was some amazing reward waiting at the end, just because creating something cool is rewarding by itself. And then there's Captura. If Fashion Frame is about creating your character, Captura is about showing everyone else. It is basically Warframe's photography mode, and some people have absolutely mastered it. The lighting, the camera angles, the poses, the editing. I've seen Captura shots that genuinely look like official promotional art. It is honestly kind of ridiculous what people managed to create with it, and here's where all of this loops back into the topic of the video. Warframe sells a lot of cosmetics, probably more than anything else, but by the time most players decide to buy one, something important has already happened. They're invested. They've already decided this is a game worth spending time in. The cosmetic isn't convincing them to stay, they're buying it because they already stayed. That's a huge difference. It doesn't feel like the game is saying you need this to keep up. It feels more like, you've spent hundreds of hours with this Warframe, why not make it look exactly the way you want? And I think that's why the phrase fashion frame is the true endgame has survived for so many years. It's not really about looking cool, maybe a little bit. But it is also proof that players become attached to the world, to the characters, and everything that they build over hundreds of hours. When a game gets people to care that much about self-expression, it's usually doing something right. For a game that's been around for more than 13 years, you'd expect the community to be impossible for new players to get into. Veterans with thousands of hours, people who know every damage calculation by heart, players whose builds look like they were designed by NASA engineers, and it sounds intimidating. But in my experience, Warframe has one of the most welcoming communities I've ever been part of. That doesn't mean every interaction is perfect, it's still the internet. You're going to run into scammers every now and then, you'll find people arguing in region chat, you'll occasionally meet someone who takes a video game way too seriously. No online community is completely free from that, but those people have never felt like the majority. What stands out to me is how willing people are to help. Maybe that's because everyone remembers what starting Warframe felt like. Nobody understands confusion quite like someone who survived the first 100 hours. You'll ask a simple question in chat and suddenly someone is explaining damage types, faction modifiers, armor stripping, and status effects with enough detail to qualify as a university lecture. Sometimes they'll even invite you to their clan just because they notice you were new. I've seen veterans spend entire evenings helping someone farm a Warframe they already built years ago. Not because they needed anything, simply because they wanted to help. And that attitude carries over into almost every part of the game. Clans aren't just there to research anymore, they're places where people teach each other, share builds, organize squads, show off new fashion, or just hang out while decorating a dojo that somehow looks more impressive than entire maps from other games. Then there's the wiki, and yeah, I'm going to mention the wiki. Because if Warframe has an unofficial code developer, it's probably the wiki. At some point, every player accepts the same reality. They're going to have a browser tab permanently dedicated to Warframe. You need to know where a resource drops, wiki. Trying to understand a mechanic introduced 5 years ago, wiki. Looking for the relic that contains a specific blind part, wiki. It almost becomes part of the game itself, and while it's easy to joke that the wiki is a real tutorial, I also think it is a testament to how passionate the community is. Thousands of people have spent years documenting almost every mechanic imaginable so the next player has an easier time than they did. That same passion shows up on YouTube. Whether you're looking for beginner guides, endgame builds, challenge runs, lore videos, or market advice, there's probably someone who has already made a detailed guide about it. I personally learned a lot from creators, and I think that's another reason Warframe has lasted so long. The community doesn't just consume content, it creates it. Now, after spending the last 20-something minutes talking about everything Warframe does well, it would be pretty easy to pretend it is the perfect free-to-play game. It isn't. In fact, some of the biggest strengths exist alongside some pretty frustrating weaknesses. And if you have already watched the first video in the series, you already know what I'm about to say. Warframe is horrible at introducing itself. I have already talked about how overwhelming those first hours can be, so I won't repeat everything here. But I think it's worth mentioning because it remains one of the biggest barriers for new players. The game has improved, the introduction is much better than it used to be. Some systems like modding have received better tutorials over time. but there's still a point where Warframe basically hands you the keys to the origin system and says good luck. For some people, that's exciting. For others, that's where they uninstall. And honestly, I can't really blame them because I did that. But the amount of information Warframe expects you to process is enormous. Damage types, mods, formats, relics, focus schools, arcanes, incarnates, the helmet, archon shards, the list just keeps growing. That's the downside of supporting a game for more than a decade. Every update adds another layer, and eventually those layers become a mountain. Then there's the grind. Now personally, I don't think grinding is automatically a bad thing. Warframe is a looter shooter. Grinding is part of the genre. You play missions to get resources, resources let you craft equipment, equipment helps you tackle harder content. That's the gameplay loop. The problem is that not every grind feels equally rewarding. Some Warframes are relatively quick to farm. Let's just say you'll become very familiar with one specific mission before you're done. Sometimes you're farming a blueprint, then a rare resource, then another component, then waiting for everything to craft, then waiting 3 more days for the Warframe itself. When you describe it out loud, it sounds kind of ridiculous, and yet, after all these years, crafting timers remain one of the most debated parts of the game. I understand why they exist. They are part of the monetization model. They're meant to encourage players to spend platinum if they don't want to wait. But I would be lying if I said I enjoy starting at a 72-hour timer after finally collecting everything I needed. Then there are what players often call content islands. Warframe has so many different systems now that sometimes they don't interact with each other as much as you expect. Railjack feels separated from the rest of the game. The Biri has its own progression, open worlds have their own economies. The game has become so big that occasionally it feels like several different experiences connected under one launcher. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, it gives players variety, but it can also make progression feel a little disconnected. Finally, there's the wiki. Now don't get me wrong, I praised it in the last chapter because it is an incredible resource, but I also think it's fair to criticize the fact that it's almost mandatory. A game shouldn't rely on an external website to explain some of its core mechanics. The community did an amazing job building that resource, I just wish new players didn't need it quite as often. So after hearing all of that, you might be wondering, if Warframe has confusing tutorials, long crafting timers, complex progression, systems that sometimes feel disconnected, and a learning curve that scares away new players, why am I still recommending it? Because none of those problems erase what the game gets right. They make the experience harder to get into. They occasionally make it frustrating, but they don't take away the freedom, the movement, the creativity, the incredible quests, the community, or the feeling that every time I come back there's still something new waiting for me. Warframe has flaws, some of them are pretty significant, but for me they've never been bigger than the reasons I keep playing, and I think that's what really matters. So after everything we've talked about over these 3 videos, I think we finally have an answer. Why has Warframe survived for more than 13 years? It isn't because it's free, there are thousands of free games. Most of them disappear before anyone even remembers their names. It isn't because it has perfect gameplay, every veteran player can probably list 10 things they'd love to see improved. It isn't because the new player experience is missing. I have literally dedicated an entire video to explaining why it isn't. And it isn't because Digital Extremes never makes mistakes, they do, every studio does. Some updates land better than others, some mechanics need years of adjustments before the final flick, and that's just the reality of maintaining a live service game for over a decade. So why does Warframe keep going? I think it's because it gives players something that very few games manage to achieve. Freedom. Freedom in how you play, how you build your equipment, how you move, how you look, what you decide to chase next. There isn't one correct way to experience Warframe. Some people spend hundreds of hours perfecting steel pad builds, others spend that same time decorating a dojo, some become traders, some become lore experts, some spend hours taking screenshots in captura mode, some just enjoy helping new players, and somehow they're all playing the same game. I think that's incredibly difficult to pull off. Most games try to get every new player toward the same destination. Warframe gives you a toolbox and asks, what do you want to do today? Maybe today you're farming a prime Warframe, tomorrow you can customize your orbiter, the next day you're learning how to fly a railjack, a week later you're riding a motorcycle through a city in 999. It constantly finds new ways to surprise you, and I think that's why I never really felt like I'd finished Warframe. I've taken breaks, sometimes for weeks, sometimes even longer, but eventually something pulls me back. Maybe it's a new cinematic quest, maybe it's a new Warframe, maybe I see a dev stream announcing something completely unexpected, or maybe I just missed logging in and bullet jumping through missions for a while. That ability to leave without feeling punished and then come back without feeling left behind is something I value a lot more now than I did when I first started playing. Especially now that life gets busier, university takes time, work takes time. There are plenty of other games I want to play, but Warframe never really demanded that I abandon those things. It simply waited until I felt like coming back. And every time I did, there was usually something new waiting for me. I think that's one of the biggest reasons I've stuck with it for so many years, not because I felt obligated to, because I wanted to. Looking back, it's honestly kind of funny. A game that started as space ninjas with guns somehow turned into one of the most creative live service games I've ever played. Fishing, mining, hoverboards, spaceships, giant mechs, motorcycles, time travel, an infested boy band. If I tried to explain all of that to someone who has never played Warframe, they'd probably think I was describing 5 completely different games. And somehow it all works. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not all the time, but well enough that 13 years later, people are still excited to see what's coming next. I don't know what Warframe will look like 5 years from now on. If history has taught us anything, it'll probably include something none of us could possibly predict. And honestly, no, actually. Let's hit that phrase for one last time. What keeps me coming back isn't the platinum. It isn't the damage numbers. It isn't even the hundreds of weapons or warframes. It's the feeling that every year Digital Extremes is still willing to ask, what if we tried something completely insane? And more often than not, they actually do it. That's why I think Warframe is one of the greatest free-to-play games ever made. Not because it's perfect, but because after all these years, it still isn't afraid to surprise its players. Thank you all for watching, and if you somehow made it through all 3 chapters of this little series, I genuinely appreciate it. This started as a university assignment, but it ended up becoming my first real attempt at making a proper video essay about a game I spent years enjoying.